In our last class, we covered an overview of our teaching interactions. Our teaching interactions are based on the principles of social learning theory, and we're not going to get too deep into who developed social learning theory and all of the crazy psychological aspects of social learning theory. What we're going to cover today are really the nuts and bolts and the things that you're going to be doing on an everyday basis that are based on social learning theory that will really be powerful in helping youth to change their behaviors. There are a couple of things that we find foundational about our beliefs about kids. One of them is that we don't believe that there are any bad kids, and we believe that youth or children with bad behaviors can change those bad behaviors through the principles of social learning theory. We know that children learn in many ways. They learn through imitating their parents, they learn through direct application of teaching, and they also learn through experiences. And social learning theory is largely based on those concepts, that behavior is learned and that it can be changed. We also really strongly believe that children will learn more quickly and more readily when that learning is based on a foundation of a strong relationship. We're going to be pairing relationships with social learning theory today as we go through the concepts that you're going to be applying with the youth in your home. As we learned in our previous class, we know that teaching interactions help youth learn valuable skills that they can apply and use throughout their lives. Social learning theory helps us apply that teaching in a way that makes what they're learning a more permanent part of their life. Social learning theory is based on an ABC paradigm. The antecedent is the thing that comes before, B is the behavior, and C is the consequence. So we analyze the ABCs of behavior in various ways. One of the things that this does is it helps us to think about our youth's behaviors and not about the child themselves. We look at what they're doing, what they're saying, we look at it objectively, and we try to look at it as separate from the child. This does a lot of important things for us as the adults. It really helps us separate their behavior from them so we don't have that concept that the child is bad. The other thing that it does is it helps us in our treatment planning for them so that we know in a given situation, for example, if they have a really rough time at school, we know that afternoons will be a key time of planning for us so that when they come home from school, we can set them up to have a better afternoon if we know that their antecedent is school and that their behavior after school is typically negative. Then the consequence of that is that they end up earning negative consequences and having a bad evening. As we sort of pull those things out and look at them objectively, it helps us set the child up for success. The first concept that we're going to talk about is positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is the consequence following a behavior that determines whether or not the behavior occurs more or less frequently in the future. So when we positively reinforce a behavior, we can anticipate that it's going to happen more often. Here are just a few examples. So when we volunteer, we get praised, then we're more likely to volunteer. If we mow the yard and earn money, again, we're going to want to do that more often. Also, if we argue and get the answer changed to what we want, then we're going to argue more often. So positive reinforcement really just is the principle that when you add something, it encourages that behavior more often. Positive in this context doesn't mean positive like praise. It means that we're adding something that increases the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So our final example is if we complain and we get out of work, then we're more likely to do that in the future. The next concept is immediacy. Immediacy, especially with young people, is really important because it helps them pair their behavior with what the consequence of that behavior is. So We also may inadvertently reinforce a negative behavior depending on how immediately we respond to it. For example, if you have a child that sloughs and you don't catch that behavior for a week, and that child hasn't had a consequence for sloughing for a week, we haven't immediately paired a consequence for sloughing with the behavior, and we might accidentally be encouraging their sloughing because they haven't earned a consequence for it. Size is another important factor in social learning theory. So for example, if I ask my child to clean out the dishwasher and I give them a pony for cleaning out the dishwasher, then the size of that reward is very much out of proportion with the size of their behavior. And size matters in a positive way, and also when we're doing consequences. So when a child has earned a consequence, it's important that the size of the consequence matches the size of their behavior. So a few examples of appropriate size in applying rewards and consequences are, for example, if your child comes home from school every day for a week on time, then they may get to go out on a Friday or a Saturday night. And that would be an appropriate reward for them coming home from school at the appropriate time. Also, a consequence could be that if they don't come home from school on time, that they don't get to go out on a Friday or a Saturday night. And this changes basically depending on the age of the child, and you will work with your consultant to determine the most appropriate consequences for the behaviors that the child is engaging in. For younger children, it's more typical that if they hit a child with a toy, then that toy is removed from them for a short period of time. But they always have the opportunity to earn that back. Sometimes parents make the mistake of removing a privilege or removing an item from a child without defining how long that item is going to be gone. And that feels very unfair and punitive to the child and really sets them up to feel that their behaviors don't matter, and that if they lose something, they won't have the opportunity to earn it back, and often leads to more negative behaviors. And this is where size is important. In the concept of time, size also is included in that concept. For example, if a 5 or 6-year-old child hits their friend with his truck, it would be appropriate for that truck to go into timeout for 1 or 2 days potentially. It would not be appropriate for that child to lose that truck forever, because then they won't have the opportunity to earn it back. The next concept we're going to talk about is satiation. If our thirst has been satiated, it means we're no longer thirsty, and that's exactly this concept. It is possible for a reinforcer to lose its power if it's applied too often. If someone offers me chocolate cake every time I do something great, I will eventually get sick of chocolate cake, even if I love it. There is such a thing as too much chocolate cake, just like there's such a thing as too much television. There's such a thing as too many video games, and things like that. So it is possible to satiate a child even on things that they really enjoy. The next concept is contingency. The best way that I have found to keep in mind the concept of contingency is in if-then statements. So if you engage in behavior A, then you will get reward or consequence B. If we offer a child a piece of chocolate cake for eating all of their vegetables for a week, then they will know what they're working for. So it's just a concept of if-then statements. More powerfully, though, than if-then statements are because-then statements. These are great because they are unexpected and they're a surprise to the child. So if you clearly lay out, if you do all of these behaviors and then you will earn something, of course they will strive to meet that goal, but that's largely external reinforcement. They know what the prize is at the end. If they do something great and then you say, because you did this, you have earned extra time with mom or dad, or we're going to go out for a walk together, or we're going to go to your favorite arcade, then this kind of reinforcement really leads to more internal motivation, because they never know when those positive things are going to be coming their way. And so they will more consistently try to do the right thing because they are looking forward to that positive reward. Availability is the concept that if you offer a child a reward, it must be available to them. If you let a child know that if they do all of their homework that they can play video games, but you know for the next 4 days your family is going to be busy and running errands and doing things that are going to make video games impossible, then basically that reward is unavailable to that child for an extended period of time. So then we lose the concept of immediacy and we lose the concept of availability. And both of those things, when they're present, make our teaching very effective. When they're not present, they make our teaching much less effective. If we offer a child a reward for something, it must be available to them within a reasonable period of time. The next concept is individual differences. Every child, every person is different. We all have different likes and dislikes. Individual differences are where we really strive to know what our kids like and what they don't like so that we can meet those individual differences. A really good example of this is that early in my career, I was helping a family set up a chore jar. And this chore jar was intended to be a consequence for negative behaviors. I had been working with the family for about 3 weeks, and the mom reported an increase in her child's negative behaviors that she just didn't understand. And frankly, I didn't understand it either. And what we found out through talking to her son was that he actually loved chores. And so he was doing negative things and misbehaving because he loved it when his mom paid attention to him. And when he did chores, she praised him so much for what a great job he did that he actually found the consequence of a chore jar to be very rewarding. And in this case, I didn't recognize, and his mom didn't recognize, that the individual difference in him was that he really, really enjoyed chores. And you can use that example in any number of ways. Some kids really love video games, and some kids don't love video games. Some children love to draw and color, others don't. So it's really important to know the youth that you're working with so that you can apply rewards and consequences that meet their individual differences. The next concept is called schedules of reinforcement. And honestly, this is just a really fancy way of saying how often we are paying attention to a particular behavior. There are basically 2 ways that we pay attention to behavior, and those are either continuous reinforcement, and that's when we're working with a child on a skill that it could be something new to them or something that they're really struggling with. We will continually reinforce that behavior. We'll find ways to praise it, we'll find ways to shape it, we'll find ways to pay attention to that behavior in almost every situation. It's also really effective when you're trying to help a youth learn a new behavior to continuously reinforce it, because it just brings that skill or that behavior that you're looking for to the top of the child's mind and kind of keeps it in the forefront while they're learning it. Once the behavior is learned or the skill is learned, then we will switch to intermittent reinforcement. If I have a child who is consistently hanging up their backpack when they come home from school, and I might have been continuously reinforcing that because that was something that I really wanted them to work on or that they needed to work on, I might switch to intermittent reinforcement of that skill to see if they continue to do it. Because I will know at that point that they're doing it because it's a habit and because it makes them happy to do it and they want to do it, versus they're only doing it because they're getting praise and attention for doing it. The next concept we're going to talk about is fading. And essentially, I just talked about that in intermittent reinforcement. What we do when we're working with a youth on building a skill is we will fade out our reinforcement of that or our prompting of that so that we can see if they've really built that skill into a habit or if they need to continue to do more work on it. A good example of that is in skills where they have really struggled in the past, but with our encouragement, they're doing a lot better. We'll start fading our prompting or our reinforcement of that just to make sure that they've really got it down. And we will have conversations with the child to make them aware that they're still doing great things, even though we haven't been praising them for them or prompting them. And it's often really exciting to see a child who was struggling to accept a no answer or go to bed on time or get up on time. When we actually, as the grown-ups in the situation, bring that to their attention, and their eyes just light up when they realize that they've built a really positive habit and they don't have to be reminded of it and they don't have to be rewarded for it. They just are doing a great job on their own. And that's when fading can be really rewarding, is to watch those small steps that the child makes forward, often without even realizing it. The next concept is shaping. And shaping is basically the opposite of fading. Shaping takes a large skill or a large behavior that we want the youth to try to use and breaks it down into small chunks. My favorite example of shaping is in eye contact. So many of our kids are not used to talking to adults or looking at adults or having much positive interaction with adults at all. So eye contact is really hard for them. And many of our skills include looking at the person that's talking to you or looking at the person that you are talking to. So we often use shaping in terms of eye contact because if we can get just a few seconds of that, that's something that we can shape and something that we can build on. And then eventually we can get the children to look at us for a longer period of time, to have a conversation with us, to use other steps of a skill that includes eye contact. And we built all of that just from the foundation of, hey kiddo, can you look me in the eye for a second? And it's just so great to see them being able to do something that they didn't think they could do, they didn't feel safe doing, they didn't feel confident. And then after the process of shaping that behavior, not only can they look you in the eye, but they can have a full-blown conversation with you for several minutes and don't even realize what a great thing that is. So shaping can be really powerful, and we use it all the time. So an extinction burst happens when you have been reinforcing a behavior and then you either stop reinforcing the behavior or you change your expectations about the child's behavior in some way. And we all like to live in a state of normalcy or status quo. So when their environment changes, that often makes kids really uncomfortable, and they'll engage in a tantrum, what we might call a tantruming behavior, or periods where they aren't responding the way that they normally do. And so what we have to do when a child is engaging in an extinction burst or experiencing an extinction burst is continue to praise, provide support, and not change our expectations, but allow the child to come back to, again, a state of emotional regulation so that they understand the new normal. The next concept is generalization. I've talked several times about internal motivation versus external motivation. It's really common for our kids to struggle with being internally motivated. They haven't received a lot of reward or praise in their lifetimes, and many of them have only received attention when it's negative. So we're having to redo or rewire a lot of the learning that took place earlier in their lives. With the concept of generalizing their learning, we are able to help them shift from externally motivating them through either points or tokens or other external rewards into a more internal motivation where they just do things because it makes them happy. They do it because it makes the people around them proud of them. They do it because they want to emulate their parents or their foster parents. And when we can help them make those kinds of internal changes, then we know that they have really been able to generalize the learning that they've gotten in their foster home to other environments. When they can not only do great in your home, but they can do well at school. They can do well on home visits with their parents. They do well in court. Those kinds of changes are what helps us understand that they're making lasting, lifelong changes, and they're not just working a program. And that's really, really rewarding. The next concept we're going to talk about is discrimination. Discrimination occurs when the child understands that a behavior that's okay in one setting is not okay in another setting. Kids at school often call each other bro and dude and have really cool, fun handshakes and things. Discrimination helps the kids understand that that's perfectly great and fine and okay at school. When we walk into court, we don't refer to our judge as bro. And this is a powerful learning tool because, again, in certain settings, those behaviors are fine. And we want them to know that it's okay to have fun. It's okay to be a person. You don't have to be formal and all buttoned up every minute of the day. The skill of discrimination helps them understand that you can be formal in a formal setting and informal in an informal setting. It's actually a pretty sophisticated skill that a lot of adults don't even know. So when they learn that, it's really impressive to the people around them that they know how to behave in specific settings in an appropriate way. The main way that we decrease inappropriate behavior is through what we call a response cost. In layman's terms, a lot of people refer to a response cost as a consequence. In social learning theory, consequences can be both positive and negative. So we refer to a response cost essentially as something a child loses because of a negative behavior. So we withdraw reinforcement following a behavior, and that's what we call a response cost. For example, if you are caught speeding, you lose money or your driver's license, that would be a response cost. Not starting your homework on time might lead to missing your favorite TV show. Missing softball practice means you might not be able to play in the next game. And finally, not doing your chores means that you're going to lose some privileges. Essentially, it's going to cost you something to engage in negative behavior. And often those things are chores or privileges or loss of freedom. But that's the way that we refer to negative consequences within the teaching family model. Many people understand the term role modeling, and it's a powerful tool that we use here at Utah Youth Village. Modeling occurs when a child learns something through watching another person. And we are teaching kids things all the time, and we don't know that we're teaching them. Some of them are very, very positive, and some of them might not be so positive. So it's important that we're always working to be positive role models in the things that we're teaching our kids. Punishment is something that we will never use at Utah Youth Village. It is essentially an application of an aversive consequence following a behavior. Things that we consider punishment are yelling, cursing, hitting, unpleasant or demeaning work, forced physical exercise, or forcing a youth to eat unappetizing food. These are violations of youth rights that will not be tolerated by any Utah Youth Village contractor or employee, and we do not allow punishment of our youth. There are a lot of reasons why punishment is inappropriate. One of them is that it will engage the fight or flight response in the youth that we work with. They, again, come from very traumatized backgrounds, and it's really easy to trigger a trauma response in them if we are not careful. So when there's a raised voice, or if an adult moves very close to a child or stands over a child, that will trigger a fight or flight response in them and often leads to negative youth behaviors that have actually been triggered by the adult in the situation. Because we are trauma-informed, we do not allow or endorse any activity that will trigger a child's trauma response. Often, even with the best parenting and the best behavior on the adult's part, a child's trauma response can be triggered. But especially if we engage in negative behavior or punishing behavior, we will definitely trigger a child to engage in their trauma cycle. Also, punishment might temporarily stop the behavior, but it doesn't help them change the behavior. Again, it's that external motivation versus an internal motivation. If, as an adult, I can force a child to get them to do what I want them to do, I am not changing their heart and I am not changing their mind. And I am making it more likely that they will hide things from me, that they will lie to me, and that they will try to get out of being punished through negative means. All in all, punishment is a violation of youth rights, and it doesn't help us change the children's behavior in a way that's going to be long-lasting and meaningful. It's not a popular notion, but for the adults, punishment can actually seem really effective, because if I yell and my child becomes very quiet, that's positively reinforcing in my mind as an adult. Social learning theory applies to adults every bit as much as it applies to children. So as the grown-ups, we have to be really mindful that if we yell and the kids get quiet, I'm more likely to yell in the future. But my child is also more likely to be afraid of me and more likely to have a negative relationship with me if I engage in those kinds of behaviors. That covers the essential components of social learning theory. They are much broader and much deeper than this brief overview, but you'll learn more about them as you work with the Utah Youth Village in becoming a treatment foster parent. Following this class, there will be a short module to check for your understanding of the social learning theory concepts. I hope that you've enjoyed class 3, and I look forward to seeing you in class 4. Thanks.